The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with tension as representatives from over 300 species gathered for an emergency session. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the diverse atmospheric requirements of beings ranging from silicon-based Vorthak to the energy-wreathed Luminari. At the center of the amphitheater, a holographic display showed the latest intelligence reports from the Terran system. Ambassador Zex Thul of the Hegemony Coalition adjusted his ceremonial breathing apparatus and rose from his elevated platform. His forearms gestured dramatically as he addressed the assembly. Esteemed colleagues, we face an unprecedented situation. The primitive species known as humans have committed an act of aggression that cannot be ignored. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as various translators converted his words into hundreds of languages and communication methods. The hegemony had been the dominant force in this galaxy for over 2 millennia, their military might unquestioned by all civilized species. 3 cycles ago, Zexthil continued, his voice carrying across the vast space, we offered the humans a generous opportunity to join our protection network. All they needed to do was provide 20% of their population for labor duties and surrender their primitive weapons. A standard integration protocol that has brought peace to countless worlds. The display shifted to show recordings from Earth. Cities burned while strange flying machines dropped explosive devices from the sky. Ground forces engaged in brutal combat using projectile weapons that seemed laughably primitive compared to plasma rifles and particle beams. Yet somehow these humans had managed to destroy 3 hegemony dreadnoughts and capture an entire battle station. Instead of gratitude, the ambassador's voice grew harsh. They responded with violence. Their leader, a female named Sarah Chen, had the audacity to send us this message. The chamber fell silent as a hologram materialized in the center. A human woman appeared, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held a coldness that made several species instinctively step back. To the so-called Galactic Council and your Hegemony Coalition, the recorded message began. We reject your offer of protection. Earth is not interested in becoming another slave world in your empire. Consider this our formal declaration of independence from your authority. Any further attempts at invasion will be met with extreme prejudice. The message ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Several representatives exchanged nervous glances. The concept of a newly discovered species rejecting hegemony authority was almost unthinkable. Counselor Vexran of the Neutral Worlds Alliance was the first to speak. Perhaps we should consider their position. They are a young species, unfamiliar with galactic politics. Surely negotiations could resolve this misunderstanding. Zexthil's 4 eyes blazed with indignation. Misunderstanding? They destroyed our ships. They killed thousands of hegemony personnel. This primitive mudball planet dares to defy an empire that spans half the galaxy. The debate that followed was heated. Some species argued for diplomatic solutions, while others called for immediate military action. The humans had violated the most fundamental rule of galactic civilization. New species must submit to the established order or face consequences. High Arbiter Kolthen, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Council eons ago, finally called for order. His telepathic voice resonated in the minds of all present, carrying the weight of millennia of experience. We have encountered stubborn species before. His mental voice conveyed patience mixed with authority. However, the humans have displayed capabilities that concern our military analysts. Their tactics are unconventional. The display showed tactical breakdowns of the recent battles. Human forces had used everything from nuclear weapons to something called kinetic bombardment that involved dropping metal rods from orbit. Their space fighters moved in patterns that defied conventional strategy, and their ground troops fought with a savagery that horrified even veteran military observers. They fight like they have nothing to lose, reported General Thakmore of the Hegemony War Command. Our psychological warfare units are baffled. Fear seems to make them more dangerous, not less. When we destroyed one of their cities as a demonstration, they didn't surrender. They became more determined. The chamber buzzed with discussion as species representatives processed this information. Most civilized species approached warfare as a chess game, with calculated moves and acceptable losses. The humans appeared to approach it as something far more personal and visceral. Ambassador Veltar of the Trade Federation raised a concern that many were thinking. If we allow one species to defy the established order, others might follow. The stability we've maintained for thousands of years could crumble. This point resonated throughout the chamber. The galactic civilization they had built depended on newer species accepting their place in the hierarchy. The hegemony provided protection and order, while smaller species contributed resources and labor. It was a system that had brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to the galaxy. The humans cannot be allowed to succeed, Zexthul declared. I propose we authorize a full-scale military response. Deploy the Third Fleet to the Terran system and end this rebellion before it spreads. The Third Fleet was legendary throughout the galaxy, 500 capital ships supported by thousands of fighters and assault craft. No species had ever withstood such force. The fleet had conquered entire star systems in days, yet some representatives remained uneasy. The initial reports from the Terran system had been disturbing. Human resistance had been far more effective than anyone had predicted. Their primitive-looking weapons had somehow penetrated hegemony shields, and their tactics had caught experienced commanders off guard. We should proceed carefully, urged Counselor Nexari of the Scientific Coalition. These humans may possess technologies we don't understand. Their rapid development suggests they might be more dangerous than they appear. Zexthul dismissed the concern with a wave of his arms. They barely achieved spaceflight 50 cycles ago. Their most advanced weapons are chemical explosives and primitive nuclear devices. The Third Fleet could glass their entire planet in a matter of hours. The debate continued for several more hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The Galactic Council had built its authority on the principle that resistance was futile. Allowing the humans to successfully defy them would undermine everything they had worked to achieve. As the session concluded, the vote was unanimous among the major powers. The Third Fleet would be dispatched to the Terran system with orders to force human surrender or face complete annihilation. What none of them realized was that their intelligence about human capabilities was woefully incomplete, and the species they were about to face had spent their entire history preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, Earth's newest and most advanced warship, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council's ultimatum, and humanity had used every moment to prepare for what everyone knew was coming. Ma'am, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures at the edge of the system, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the sensor station. The computer estimates approximately 500 vessels, all significantly larger than anything in our database. Elena nodded grimly. The Third Fleet had arrived exactly when Earth's intelligence network had predicted. The humans had not been idle since first contact with the hegemony. Every captured alien device had been reverse-engineered, every prisoner interrogated, and every scrap of intelligence analyzed by the brightest minds on Earth. Signal all stations, Elena commanded. Operation Hornet's Nest is now active. All civilian populations are to proceed to designated shelters immediately. Across the solar system, humanity's response began to unfold. Unlike the hegemony's expectation of a primitive species cowering in fear, they encountered something entirely different. Earth had transformed itself into a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The space around Earth bristled with defensive installations. Orbital platforms mounted weapons that combined human engineering with captured alien technology. The moon had been hollowed out and converted into a massive military base, its surface covered with railgun batteries and missile silos. Even the asteroid belt had been weaponized, with mining platforms retrofitted as mobile weapons platforms. Fleet Admiral Kexvar of the Third Fleet studied the sensor readings from his flagship with growing confusion. These readings cannot be accurate. The intelligence reports indicated minimal orbital infrastructure. His tactical officer, Commander Yeltan, double-checked the displays. Sir, I'm reading over 3,000 individual weapon signatures throughout the system. They appear to have fortified everything from tiny asteroids to their outer planets. The Admiral's confidence wavered slightly. 3 months was barely enough time for an advanced civilization to deploy such defenses, let alone a species that had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Begin standard bombardment protocol. Target their orbital installations first, then proceed with planetary pacification. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. As the hegemony fleet moved into attack formation, Humanity struck first. The assault began from the asteroid belt. What the aliens had dismissed as primitive mining platforms suddenly revealed their true nature. Massive railguns, larger than anything that should have been possible to build in such a short time, opened fire across impossible distances. The projectiles weren't just metal slugs. They were guided kinetic weapons that could adjust their trajectory mid-flight. Impossible, Admiral Kexvar shouted as his flagship's shields flared under impact. How are they targeting us at this range? The answer lay in humanity's greatest advantage, their approach to warfare. While other species had developed advanced weapons and shields over millennia, they had also become predictable. Humans had only been fighting in space for a few months, but they had been fighting each other for thousands of years. Every trick, every dirty move, every unconventional tactic from human history was being applied to space combat. The real surprise came when the hegemony fleet reached Mars orbit. The red planet had been transformed into something that defied comprehension. Its surface was covered with launch tubes that fired what appeared to be simple nuclear missiles. But as the alien point defense systems engaged the incoming warheads, they discovered the truth. Each missile split into dozens of smaller projectiles at the last moment. Some were decoys, others were traditional explosives, but many contained something far more dangerous. Human soldiers in powered armor designed for void combat. Boarding pods? Commander Yelton stared at the tactical display in disbelief. They're using their warriors as missiles. The human assault troops crashed through the hulls of hegemony ships with shaped charges, then fought their way through corridors with a savagery that shocked the alien crews. Unlike civilized species that fought with restraint and followed established rules of engagement, humans treated every battle as a fight for survival. Private Sarah Kim found herself face-to-face with a hegemony warrior twice her size in the corridors of an enemy dreadnought. The alien's plasma rifle should have been an overwhelming advantage, but Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario. She rolled under his first shot, activated her armor's magnetic grapples to stick to the ceiling, and emptied her rifle's magazine into the alien's unarmored joints before he could adjust his aim. Human tactics are chaotic and unpredictable, Admiral Kexvar reported to Fleet Command as his forces struggled to maintain formation. They seemed to have no regard for acceptable casualty rates or civilized rules of engagement. The battle raged throughout the inner system as the hegemony fleet pushed toward Earth. But with each victory, they paid a higher price than expected. Human defenders didn't retreat in orderly formations. They fought to the last soldier, taking as many enemies with them as possible. Captured ships were rigged with explosives that detonated when rescue teams attempted to board them. The most shocking moment came when Admiral Kexvar received a direct communication from Admiral Vasquez aboard the UES Defiance. The human woman's image appeared on his command screen, her uniform torn and bloodied from personal combat. "Admiral Kexvar," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos visible behind her on the bridge. "I want you to understand something about my species. We've been preparing for this war our entire history. Every conflict we've ever fought has taught us how to kill things bigger and stronger than ourselves." Behind her, explosions lit up the bridge as the Defiance engaged 3 hegemony cruisers simultaneously. The ship was clearly outgunned and taking massive damage, but it continued fighting with a determination that bordered on madness. "Your empire has ruled through fear for thousands of years," Vasquez continued, "but you've never faced a species that thrives on conflict. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? We don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies regret ever threatening us." The communication ended as the Defiance exploded in a brilliant fireball, taking 2 of the attacking cruisers with it. Admiral Kexvar stared at the empty screen, beginning to understand that this was not going to be the quick victory the Council had expected. As the Third Fleet finally reached Earth orbit, they found themselves facing not a defeated enemy, but a species that had used every moment of the battle to prepare an even deadlier welcome. The real war was just beginning. The orbital battle around Earth had been raging for 6 hours when Admiral Kexvar realized his fleet was dying by inches. What should have been a simple bombardment had turned into a nightmare of attrition warfare. Every human installation destroyed was immediately replaced by 2 more emerging from hidden locations. Every ship that fell was avenged by suicide attacks that cost the hegemony far more than they could afford. "Sir, we've lost 47 capital ships and over 200 support vessels," Commander Yelton reported, his voice strained with disbelief. The humans have lost everything we've targeted, but they keep producing new weapons platforms faster than we can destroy them. Admiral Keksavar studied the tactical display with growing horror. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were adapting their tactics in real time. Every weapon system the hegemony deployed was countered within hours by some new human innovation. It was as if the entire species was learning from each battle and immediately sharing that knowledge across their entire military. The truth was even more disturbing than the Admiral suspected. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that had once been called NORAD, humanity's greatest minds were connected through neural interfaces to a quantum computing network that processed battlefield data faster than any alien computer system. Every engagement provided new information that was instantly distributed to every human commander in the system. Dr. James Chen, brother of Earth's Prime Minister, monitored the data streams while coordinating with military strategists around the globe. The aliens are using predictable formation patterns based on mathematical models, he announced to the assembled War Council. Their shields operate on specific frequency cycles, and their weapons have consistent charge-up times. We can exploit these patterns. General Marcus Stone, Earth's top military commander, nodded grimly as he studied the incoming data. They fight like they're playing a game with rules. We need to break those rules. The next phase of Earth's defense was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human engineers had spent the past 3 months not just building weapons, but creating entirely new forms of warfare. The orbital platforms weren't just gun emplacements. They were factories capable of producing new weapon systems during combat. As the hegemony fleet closed in on Earth's atmosphere, the planet's surface opened up like a flower of destruction. Massive doors hidden beneath forests and cities slid apart, revealing launch tubes that stretched deep into the Earth's crust. What emerged defied every principle of civilized warfare. What in the name of the void are those? Admiral Keksavar demanded, as his sensors detected thousands of new contacts rising from Earth's surface. The objects were roughly cylindrical, about the size of a shuttlecraft, but they moved with an erratic pattern that made them almost impossible to target. As they approached the hegemony fleet, their true nature became clear. Each one was a manned fighter craft, but they bore no resemblance to any fighter design in galactic history. Captain Lisa Park gripped the controls of her Valkyrie-class assault fighter as she screamed through space toward the nearest hegemony dreadnought. Her craft was little more than an engine strapped to a pilot's seat, and armed with weapons that violated every safety protocol the galaxy had ever established. The reactor that powered her ship was deliberately unstable, giving her incredible acceleration at the cost of making her fighter essentially a flying bomb. Valkyrie Squadron, this is Park, she transmitted to her wingmates. Remember, we're not trying to survive this. We're trying to take as many of them with us as possible. The response from her squadron was immediate and chilling. 23 voices replied in unison. For Earth, the human fighter assault was beyond suicidal. It was apocalyptic. The Valkyrie fighters moved through space like bullets, their unstable reactors allowing them to accelerate far beyond what should have been possible. When they reached their targets, they didn't just fire their weapons. They rammed into the alien ships at relativistic speeds, their exploding reactors tearing holes through armor that should have been impenetrable. Admiral Keksavar watched in horror as a single human fighter punched clean through his flagship's forward shields and embedded itself in the hull before detonating. The explosion took out 3 decks and killed hundreds of crew members. How is this possible? Their technology should be centuries behind ours. The answer lay in humanity's approach to the problem. While other species had developed advanced technology over millennia, humans had learned to push existing technology far beyond its intended limits. Their reactors ran hotter than was safe, their weapons drew more power than they were designed to handle, and their pilots accepted casualty rates that would have broken any other species' morale. But the real shock came when the surviving hegemony ships detected massive energy signatures coming from Earth's moon. Luna had been hollowed out and converted into something that challenged the laws of physics. Deep within the moon's core, human engineers had built the largest particle accelerator in the solar system. Moonbase Actual, this is Earth Command, came the transmission from the planet's surface. You are authorized to fire the Luna cannon. What emerged from the moon was not a beam of energy, but a projectile that had been accelerated to a significant percentage of light speed. The tungsten rod, no larger than a telephone pole, struck the hegemony fleet's flagship with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The alien dreadnought simply ceased to exist, its atoms scattered across space by the impact. Impossible, Admiral Keksevar whispered from his backup command ship. No species should be able to achieve such energies without exotic matter. The truth was that humans couldn't achieve such energies safely. The Luna cannon had a significant chance of destroying the moon with each firing, but humanity had calculated that the risk was acceptable if it meant stopping the invasion. As the battle raged, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Human deep space monitoring stations, disguised as scientific research vessels, had been observing alien movements for months. But they hadn't been passive observers. Small teams of human saboteurs had infiltrated hegemony supply lines, using captured alien technology to pass as legitimate vessels. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, the same soldier who had fought in the corridors of an alien dreadnought earlier in the battle, was now coordinating strikes against hegemony logistics networks thousands of light years away. Her teams had spent weeks learning alien languages and customs, then infiltrating key supply depots with explosives that would activate simultaneously across the galaxy. Earth Command. This is Havoc Team 7. Kim reported from a hegemony fuel depot in the Rigel system. Charges are set and ready for detonation. We count 47 fuel tankers and 12 ammunition transports. Similar reports came in from 17 other systems. Human saboteurs had infiltrated the hegemony's rear areas and were preparing to cripple their ability to wage war. When the charges detonated, the explosions would be visible from neighboring star systems. Admiral Keksevar received the reports of the supply depot attacks with growing panic. How did they penetrate our security? How did they even reach our core systems? The answer was simple but terrifying. Humans had studied every piece of alien technology they could capture, learning not just how it worked, but how to fake being part of the alien civilization. They had sent their best soldiers and spies deep into hegemony space, knowing it was a one-way mission, with orders to cause as much damage as possible when the time came. As the Third Fleet continued to die in Earth orbit, Admiral Keksevar began to understand that humanity hadn't just been preparing for a defensive battle. They had been preparing for total war on a galactic scale. Every human captured, every ship destroyed, every piece of intelligence gathered had been part of a larger plan to strike at the heart of the hegemony itself. The species the Galactic Council had dismissed as primitive was revealing itself to be something far more dangerous. A civilization that had spent its entire existence learning how to fight enemies stronger than themselves. And now they were applying those lessons on a cosmic scale. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any in recorded history. Representatives from across the galaxy materialized as holograms in the Great Chamber, their homeworlds too distant to allow physical attendance. The reason for the unprecedented gathering was displayed on screens throughout the amphitheater. Real-time footage of human sabotage operations devastating hegemony infrastructure across 17 star systems. Ambassador Zexthul's forearms trembled with rage as he addressed the assembly. Esteemed colleagues, the situation has escalated beyond our worst projections. These humans have somehow infiltrated our most secure installations and are conducting coordinated attacks across thousands of light years. The images on the displays were shocking. Massive fuel depots exploded in brilliant fireballs that could be seen from orbit. Supply convoys were ambushed by fighters that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Most disturbing of all were the recordings of human infiltrators, who had somehow learned to mimic alien species well enough to pass security screenings. High Arbiter Colvin's mental voice carried a gravity that silenced all other discussion. We are witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species barely 3 months into interstellar conflict has managed to strike at targets that our own intelligence services considered impregnable. The tactical briefings that followed painted an increasingly dire picture. Human strike teams had not only attacked military targets, but had also begun broadcasting propaganda throughout hegemony space. The messages were being transmitted on frequencies that bypassed government censors, reaching populations that had never heard criticism of the established order. Citizens of the galaxy, came the voice of Prime Minister Sarah Chen from intercepted broadcasts. For thousands of years, you have been told that the hegemony's rule is necessary for peace and prosperity. but what they call peace is slavery. What they call prosperity is the theft of your resources and the conscription of your children. The broadcasts included footage from the battle around Earth, showing human defenders fighting impossible odds with a determination that shocked alien viewers. More damaging still were recordings of captured hegemony officers describing their orders to exterminate entire human populations, including children and civilians. Counselor Vexron of the Neutral Worlds Alliance was the first to voice what many were thinking. These broadcasts are causing unrest across our member worlds. 3 systems have already declared neutrality in this conflict, and our intelligence services report growing dissent in dozens of others. The truth was even worse than the Council realized. Humanity's psychological warfare campaign was targeting the fundamental weakness of the galactic civilization. It had become complacent. Most species had lived under hegemony protection for so long that they had forgotten what independence meant. The human broadcasts weren't just calling for rebellion. They were reminding alien populations of freedoms they had surrendered generations ago. On the Vorthak homeworld, crystalline beings gathered in geometric formations to discuss the human transmissions. Their species had been among the first to join the hegemony, trading their military independence for protection against a threat that no longer existed. Now, young Vorthak were asking why they still needed to send a quarter of their population to work in hegemony factories. The humans fight with a unity we have not seen in our species for generations, observed Vorthak Elder Jexnil during a clandestine gathering. They show us what we have lost in exchange for safety. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. Species that had accepted hegemony rule without question were beginning to remember their own histories of independence and self-determination. The human example was proving that resistance was not only possible, but could be effective. Meanwhile, in the Terran system, the battle had evolved into something resembling a siege. The remainder of the Third Fleet had established a blockade around Earth, but they found themselves unable to complete their mission. Every attempt to approach the planet was met with increasingly sophisticated resistance. Admiral Kexvar, now commanding from his 3rd flagship after the previous 2 had been destroyed, studied intelligence reports with growing desperation. The humans have somehow expanded their industrial capacity during the battle. They are producing more weapons now than when we first arrived. The explanation lay in humanity's approach to warfare. While the hegemony fought with the resources they had brought to the battle, humans had converted their entire civilization into a war machine. Factories that had once produced consumer goods now turned out weapons. Schools had become training centers for soldiers and saboteurs. Even children were contributing to the war effort, working in ammunition factories with a dedication that alien observers found both admirable and disturbing. Dr. James Chen's neural interface facility had expanded into a globe-spanning network that coordinated not just military operations, but the entire human war effort. Every civilian was connected to the network, sharing information and resources with an efficiency that defied alien understanding. The enemy fleet is showing signs of supply exhaustion, he reported to the Global War Council. Their weapons fire has decreased by 30% over the past week, and their fighter sorties have dropped to minimal levels. Our deep space sabotage operations are working. The human strategy was becoming clear to those who studied it carefully. They weren't just fighting a defensive battle. They were waging a war of attrition designed to bleed the hegemony dry. Every day the Third Fleet remained in the Terran system, they consumed resources that could not be replaced. Every ship they lost was irreplaceable, while human production continued to accelerate. But the most significant development was happening in the deeper regions of human space. Scout ships reported that massive construction projects were underway throughout the outer solar system. Entire asteroids were being converted into something that defied classification. Part factory, part fortress, part launching platform for missions that remained classified even from most human commanders. General Marcus Stone observed the construction through enhanced telescopic displays with grim satisfaction. Project Prometheus is ahead of schedule. Our advanced teams have already established forward bases in 7 MAR, systems beyond hegemony territory. Project Prometheus was humanity's most ambitious undertaking. The construction of self-sufficient colony ships that could establish new human settlements in the most remote regions of the galaxy. But these weren't refugee vessels fleeing a lost war. They were invasion platforms designed to establish human presence in areas the hegemony had never considered defending. Each Prometheus ship carried not just colonists, but complete industrial infrastructure, military forces, and most importantly, the knowledge and technology humanity had captured from their enemies. When they reached their destinations, they would begin building new human civilizations that could support the war effort while remaining hidden from alien detection. The hegemony thinks in terms of controlling existing systems, Stone explained to his senior staff. They've never had to defend against an enemy that can create new bases faster than they can be discovered. As news of the human expansion reached the Galactic Council, panic began to set in among the member species. The humans weren't just defending their home system, they were preparing to spread across the galaxy like a plague. Every day the war continued. Humanity grew stronger while the hegemony grew weaker. Ambassador Zexthol's latest report to the Council carried a note of desperation that had never been heard before from a hegemony representative. We may have miscalculated the nature of this threat. The humans are not simply another species to be integrated into our order. They represent a fundamental challenge to everything we have built. The galaxy was beginning to understand that the war with humanity was not going to end with a simple victory or defeat. It was reshaping the very nature of interstellar civilization, and the changes had only just begun. 6 months after the siege of Earth began, the impossible happened. The mighty Third Fleet, pride of the hegemony navy, requested permission to withdraw from the Terran system. Admiral Keksevar's final transmission to Fleet Command was brief and devastating. We have lost 70% of our forces and gained nothing. The humans have somehow increased their defensive capabilities throughout the siege. Continuation of this operation will result in total fleet destruction. The withdrawal of the Third Fleet sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, a hegemony military force had been defeated by a single world. But as reports filtered in from across the Empire, it became clear that Earth's resistance was just the beginning of the hegemony's problems. The human sabotage campaigns had evolved from simple terrorism into full-scale guerrilla warfare. What had started as isolated attacks on supply depots had grown into coordinated uprisings across dozens of star systems. Species that had been subjugated for centuries were remembering how to fight, inspired by the human example and aided by human advisors who had somehow infiltrated the deepest regions of hegemony space. On the industrial world of Keth Prime, the Zalarian workforce had been producing weapons for the hegemony military for over 800 years. The gray-skinned humanoids had long ago accepted their role as a client species, trading their freedom for protection and steady employment. But the human broadcasts had awakened, something that hegemony administrators thought had been bred out of them generations ago. Foreman Kelvox studied the human technical manuals that had somehow appeared in the factory systems overnight. The documents showed how to convert the plasma welders used in weapons manufacturing into crude, but effective military weapons. More importantly, they included tactical information about hegemony security procedures and their weaknesses. The humans are right, Kelvox whispered to his work crew during a shift change. We have the numbers. We have the knowledge of how their systems work. We have been building their weapons for centuries. Why do we not build them for ourselves? The uprising on Keth Prime began at 0300 local time when every plasma welder in the primary manufacturing complex was simultaneously converted into a weapon and turned against the hegemony security forces. Within 6 hours, the Zalarians had seized control of the entire industrial complex and were broadcasting their own declaration of independence. Similar uprisings erupted across the galaxy. The aquatic species of Hydro 7 flooded their mining platforms, drowning the hegemony overseers in the toxic oceans they had been forced to work in. The insectoid hive minds of the Kepler cluster turned their collective intelligence against their former masters, coordinating attacks with a precision that caught hegemony forces completely off guard. But the most shocking rebellion came from an unexpected source: the hegemony military itself. General Thakmor, who had been reporting on human tactics for months, found himself in command of a force that was increasingly reluctant to fight. Hegemony soldiers had spent centuries fighting against primitive species armed with simple weapons. The humans had changed everything. "Sir," reported Colonel Ventak during a strategy meeting aboard the command ship Dominion, Our casualty rates in every engagement with human forces are unacceptable. We are losing experienced officers faster than they can be replaced. Some units are reporting that they would rather face court-martial than return to combat against the humans. General Thakmore studied the tactical reports with growing unease. The humans had turned war into something personal and visceral. Hegemony soldiers were trained to fight in formations, following established protocols against enemies who followed similar rules. The humans fought like demons, using tactics that seemed to come from some primitive part of their psyche that civilized species had evolved beyond. They booby-trapped their own dead, Ventak continued. They use weapons that kill the user as often as the enemy. They fight like every battle is their last, and somehow that makes them more effective, not less. The breaking point came when General Thakmore received orders to deploy chemical weapons against human civilian populations. The directive came directly from the Hegemony High Command, frustrated by their inability to break human resistance through conventional means. "We are to target their population centers with nerve agents," the general read aloud to his senior staff. "The goal is to break their will to resist by demonstrating the cost of continued defiance." The silence that followed was telling. Hegemony military doctrine had always emphasized the protection of civilian populations, even during conquest operations. The order to deliberately target non-combatants represented a fundamental shift in how the Empire approached warfare. "Sir," Colonel Ventak spoke carefully, "many of our officers joined the military to protect civilian populations from exactly this kind of attack. If we carry out these orders, we become the very thing we swore to defend against." General Thakmore found himself facing a choice that no hegemony officer had ever confronted: follow orders that violated everything he believed in, or refuse and face the consequences. The decision was made easier by intelligence reports showing that human forces had captured and were treating hegemony prisoners according to civilized standards of war, even while their own people were being targeted for extermination. "We will not deploy chemical weapons against civilian targets," General Thakmore announced to his staff. "Any officer who disagrees with this decision is free to request transfer to another command." Not a single officer requested transfer. Within hours, reports reached Hegemony High Command that the entire 4th Army Group had declared itself neutral in the conflict with humanity. General Thakmore's final message to his superiors was broadcast throughout the galaxy. "We joined the military to protect civilization, not to destroy it. Until the hegemony returns to its founding principles, we will not participate in genocide." The mutiny of the 4th Army Group triggered a cascade of defections throughout the hegemony military. Officers who had grown uncomfortable with the increasingly brutal tactics demanded by high command found themselves with both justification and support for refusing orders. Entire fleets declared neutrality, while others openly joined the growing coalition of species fighting for independence. Meanwhile, humanity's expansion into deep space was proceeding ahead of schedule. The Prometheus colony ships had reached their destinations and were beginning the process of establishing new human settlements in previously unexplored regions of the galaxy. But these weren't simply refugee camps for Earth's population. They were military bases designed to support a new phase of human strategy. Captain Maria Santos commanded the Prometheus 7 as it established humanity's first permanent base beyond the galactic rim. The installation was hidden within an asteroid field that would be invisible to hegemony sensors, but it contained manufacturing capabilities that could support a fleet of human warships. "Earth Command, this is Santos reporting," she transmitted through quantum communication arrays that defied interception. "New Terra base is fully operational. We have mining operations extracting rare metals, shipyards capable of producing capital ships, and training facilities for our new allies." The new allies were species that had been written off by the hegemony as too primitive for integration. Humanity had made contact with dozens of developing civilizations and offered them something the galaxy had never seen: a partnership between equals. Instead of demanding tribute and submission, humans provided technology and military training in exchange for voluntary cooperation. The Cathera, a warrior species that the hegemony had avoided due to their aggressive nature, found themselves perfectly suited to human military doctrine. Their natural ferocity, combined with human tactical innovation, created shock troops that could devastate hegemony formations with frightening efficiency. Commander Zethkar of the Cathera, Death Guards stood beside human advisors as they planned the liberation of the Rigel system. "Your species fights as the Kithra have always dreamed of fighting," he rumbled in his gravelly voice. "With honor, but without mercy for those who would enslave others." The human advisor, Colonel Jessica Park, sister of the fighter pilot who had died in Earth's defense, nodded grimly. "The hegemony has ruled through fear for too long. It's time they learned what real fear feels like." The attack on the Rigel system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human stealth technology, combined with Kythera berserker tactics and support from local resistance movements, created a military force that could strike anywhere without warning. The hegemony garrison, which had controlled the system for over 1,000 years, was overwhelmed in less than 6 hours. But the real shock came when the liberation forces reached the primary hegemony administrative center. Instead of finding the expected military installations, they discovered something that horrified even the battle-hardened human soldiers. Processing centers where civilian populations were being sorted for shipment to labor camps across the galaxy. "My God," whispered Colonel Park as she surveyed rows of holding cells containing representatives from dozens of species. "They're not just conquering worlds. They're harvesting populations, T." Discovery of the hegemony's true methods sparked outrage across the galaxy. Species that had believed they were partners in a protective alliance learned that they were actually being systematically exploited. The human broadcasts that followed included footage from the processing centers that turned public opinion decisively against the established order. Prime Minister Sarah Chen's address to the galaxy carried a new tone of moral authority that resonated with billions of beings across thousands of worlds. "Citizens of the galaxy, you have seen the truth of hegemony rule. They call it protection, but it is slavery. They call it order, but it is oppression. Humanity offers you something different, the chance to determine your own destiny." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Entire sectors declared independence from the hegemony, while others offered to join the growing human-led coalition. The galactic civilization that had existed for millennia was crumbling, replaced by something new and unprecedented, a confederation of free worlds united not by fear, but by shared principles of liberty and mutual respect. As reports of the Galactic Revolution reached the Council chambers, Ambassador Zexthul faced the reality that his empire was dying. The hegemony had built its power on the principle that resistance was futile, but humanity had proven that wrong. Now every species in the galaxy knew that freedom was possible, and they were willing to fight for it. The war that had begun as a simple pacification mission had become something far greater, the birth of a new galactic order that would reshape civilization itself. 1 year after the first human shot was fired in anger, the Galactic Council faced a reality that would have been unthinkable just months before. The hegemony coalition was collapsing. What had begun as a rebellion by a single, primitive world had grown into a galaxy-wide revolution that threatened to tear apart thousands of years of established order. High Arbiter Colthan's ancient mind processed streams of data from across the galaxy as he prepared for what many believed would be the final council session. The telepathic being had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the speed and scope of the current crisis. "Honored colleagues," his mental voice resonated through the great chamber, now only half filled as many species had declared independence or simply stopped attending. "We gather to address the collapse of galactic civilization as we have known it. The humans have accomplished something that our greatest military theorists declared impossible. They have defeated the concept of imperial authority itself." The reports that followed painted a picture of systematic dissolution. The hegemony military was fragmenting as entire fleets declared neutrality or joined the human-led coalition. Supply lines that had operated for millennia were severed by constant sabotage. Most critically, the tribute system that funded the entire imperial structure had collapsed as client species either rebelled or simply stopped paying. Ambassador Zexthul, his once proud bearing now hunched with defeat, addressed the assembly with barely controlled desperation. "The humans have perverted everything we built. They have convinced our own subjects that servitude is slavery, that order is oppression, that the stability we provided is somehow wrong." What Zexthul could not bring himself to acknowledge was that humanity had done something far more dangerous than simply winning battles. They had changed the fundamental conversation about power and authority throughout the galaxy. Species that had accepted hegemony rule for generations were asking questions that had not been heard for centuries. Why do we need protectors? Who gave them the right to rule us? What would happen if we governed ourselves? The answers to those questions were being demonstrated across the galaxy as human-assisted liberation movements established new forms of government based on principles that seemed alien to the established order. Instead of hierarchical systems with clear chains of command, the human-influenced worlds were experimenting with distributed authority, consensual leadership, and something they called democratic representation. On New Vorthak, the crystalline beings had established what they called a council of resonance, where decisions were made through harmonic consensus rather than imperial decree. The aquatic peoples of Hydros 7th had formed swimming federations that governed through fluid coalitions that adapted to changing circumstances. Most shocking of all, the insectoid hive minds had broken their collective consciousness into smaller groups that maintained independence while cooperating on larger projects. These political experiments are spreading chaos throughout our territory, complained Councillor Dexara of the Administrative Coalition. Without clear authority structures, how can order be maintained? How can commerce function? How can conflicts be resolved? The answer came from an unexpected source. The results were working. Human advisors had helped establish trade networks based on mutual benefit, rather than tribute extraction. Conflicts between species were being resolved through negotiation and mediation, rather than imperial intervention. Most remarkably, economic productivity was actually increasing as species were allowed to develop their natural advantages rather than being forced into roles assigned by hegemony bureaucrats. Dr. James Chen, now operating from a mobile command center that moved throughout human space, monitored the galactic transformation through neural interfaces that had evolved far beyond their original design. The quantum network that had started as a military coordination system had become something approaching a galactic internet, allowing instant communication between human-allied worlds across thousands of light-years. The data is undeniable, he reported to Prime Minister Chen during their weekly strategic briefing. Every metric we can measure shows improvement in worlds that have adopted human-assisted governance models. Agricultural production is up 40%. Industrial output has increased by 60%. Most importantly, population happiness indices have reached levels not seen since before hegemony expansion began. But the most significant development was happening in the depths of space, where human expansion had reached a critical milestone. The Prometheus colonies had grown from hidden bases into thriving civilizations that were beginning to establish their own expansion programs. Humanity was no longer confined to a single star system or even a single galaxy arm. They were becoming a truly interstellar civilization with the industrial capacity to support continued growth. Admiral Elena Vasquez, now commanding the rebuilt Earth Defense Fleet from her flagship the UES Retribution, observed the latest fleet exercises with satisfaction. The ships under her command bore little resemblance to the desperate defenders that had fought the siege of Earth a year ago. They were larger, faster, and more heavily armed than any vessel in hegemony service, incorporating technology captured from dozens of alien species and improved by human engineering. Admiral, reported her communications officer, we're receiving surrender requests from hegemony garrisons in 7 more systems. They're asking for safe passage to neutral territory in exchange for abandoning their positions. Vasquez nodded approvingly. This had become standard procedure as hegemony forces found themselves increasingly isolated and outnumbered. Rather than fight hopeless battles, many units were simply withdrawing from their posts and seeking asylum in neutral space. Grant their requests, she ordered, but make sure they understand that any return to hegemony service will be considered an act of war against the Coalition. The Coalition of Free Worlds had grown from humanity's desperate wartime alliances into a formal, interstellar government that now represented over 300 star systems. Unlike the hierarchical structure of the hegemony, the Coalition operated on principles of voluntary association and mutual defense. Member species retained full autonomy over their internal affairs, while cooperating on matters of trade, defense, and scientific research. The effectiveness of this approach was demonstrated when the hegemony attempted one final offensive to reassert control over the core systems. The attack was met not by human forces alone, but by a combined fleet representing dozens of species, each contributing their unique strengths to a coordinated defense that overwhelmed the attackers. Captain Sethkar of the Kithara Death Guards commanded a squadron of heavy assault ships alongside human destroyers and Zalarian support vessels. The diverse fleet moved with a precision that defied conventional military theory, each species adapting their tactics to complement their allies' strengths. Human vessel retribution, "This is Kithara battle leader Sethkar," came the transmission as the combined fleet engaged hegemony forces near the Centauri system. "Your species has taught us that true strength comes not from domination, but from unity among equals. Today we fight not as conquerors but as liberators." The battle was over within hours. The hegemony fleet, composed of vessels from a single species following rigid tactical doctrines, could not adapt to the fluid, multi-species tactics employed by the coalition forces. More importantly, many hegemony ships simply refused to fight, their crews having lost faith in the cause they were ordered to defend. As news of the defeat reached the council chambers, the remaining hegemony loyalists faced the reality that their empire was finished. The infrastructure of galactic governance they had built over millennia was crumbling, replaced by something new and unprecedented. The age of imperial rule was ending, and the age of free association was beginning. Ambassador Zexthul's final speech to the council carried the weight of a civilization's ending. "Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps the humans were right. Perhaps the galaxy no longer needs the order we provided. But what comes next? Can this chaos they call freedom truly replace the stability we built?" The answer was already being written across the stars as hundreds of worlds embraced their newfound liberty and began building something the galaxy had never seen: a truly free civilization. 5 years had passed since the first human warship fired upon a hegemony vessel, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the ordered civilization that had existed before. The transformation was so complete that younger generations of aliens struggled to understand how the old system had ever functioned at all. Prime Minister Sarah Chen stood before the first Galactic Assembly of Free Worlds, held on a neutral space station constructed specifically for this purpose. Representatives from over 800 star systems had gathered to formalize the new order that had emerged from the ashes of the hegemony. Unlike the old council chambers where species were ranked by their military contribution to the empire, the assembly hall was designed as a perfect circle where every delegation held equal status. "Citizens of the galaxy," Chen began, her words simultaneously translated into thousands of languages and communication methods. "We gather not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals who have chosen to work together for our mutual benefit. 5 years ago, humanity was unknown to most of you. Today we stand together as partners in the greatest experiment in galactic history. True self-determination for all sentient beings." The applause that followed came from beings so diverse that the sound created a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and sounds that had no equivalent in human language. Representatives of species that had been enemies for millennia sat side by side, united by their shared commitment to principles that had seemed impossible just years before. Dr. James Chen, now serving as the Coalition's Director of Technological Integration, presented the Assembly with data that validated the revolutionary changes. Economic output across Coalition space has increased by over 300% since liberation began. Scientific advancement has accelerated beyond all previous rates. Most importantly, violent conflicts between member species have decreased to historically negligible levels. The success of the Coalition model had exceeded even humanity's most optimistic projections. When species were allowed to develop according to their natural strengths rather than serving imposed roles, the results had been extraordinary. The Vorthak had become master terraformers, using their crystalline nature to seed new worlds with mineral structures that supported diverse ecosystems. The aquatic species had developed underwater cities that served as research centers for marine biology across hundreds of worlds. The insectoid hive minds had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. No longer forced to maintain rigid collective consciousness for military purposes, they had split into specialized subgroups that pursued everything from artistic expression to theoretical physics. Their distributed intelligence networks had become the backbone of the Coalition's communication systems, allowing instant coordination across galactic distances. Admiral Elena Vasquez, now commanding the Coalition Defense Force, reported on the final chapters of the hegemony's collapse. The last hegemony strongholds have been abandoned. Their remaining forces have either joined neutral territories or sought asylum within Coalition space. We estimate that over 95% of the former Empire's territory is now under Coalition protection or independent governance. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some species had struggled to adapt to self-governance after millennia of imperial rule. Others had initially fallen into chaos as old power structures collapsed without clear replacements. But humanity's approach to these problems had proven remarkably effective. Instead of imposing solutions, they provided support and allowed each species to find their own path forward. On the former hegemony capital world of Dominion Prime, Ambassador Zextal served as the leader of a transitional government that was slowly learning to function without imperial authority. The process had been painful for a species that had built their entire identity around ruling others, but it had also been liberating in unexpected ways. The humans offered us something we never expected, Zextal reflected during his address to the assembly. They offered us forgiveness. Instead of punishing us for our crimes, they helped us rebuild our civilization based on cooperation, rather than domination. They showed us that strength comes not from controlling others, but from empowering them. The former hegemony species had found new purposes in the coalition structure. Their administrative skills, developed over millennia of imperial governance, proved invaluable in coordinating the complex logistics of multi-species cooperation. Their military expertise was redirected toward defense and peacekeeping rather than conquest. Most importantly, their experience with different cultures made them natural diplomats. In the new galactic order, the most remarkable development had been the emergence of hybrid communities where multiple species worked together on equal terms. Human colony ships had become traveling cities where dozens of species lived and worked together, creating new forms of culture that drew from the best of all their traditions. Captain Maria Santos, now commanding a deep space exploration vessel, crewed by representatives from 30 different species, reported on discoveries that would have been impossible under the old system. When species work together as equals, we achieve things that no single civilization could accomplish alone. We've discovered new forms of physics, developed technologies that seemed impossible, and explored regions of space that individual species would never have attempted to reach. The exploration fleets had pushed beyond the boundaries of known space, establishing contact with civilizations that had remained hidden during the hegemony era. These new species were offered the same choice that had been given to all others: join the coalition as equals, remain independent with guaranteed sovereignty, or simply trade and communicate as they chose. But perhaps the most significant achievement was something that couldn't be measured in economic output or territorial expansion: the restoration of hope throughout the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, young beings could look forward to futures that weren't predetermined by their species' role in the imperial hierarchy. They could pursue their dreams, develop their talents, and contribute to galactic civilization in ways that reflected their individual abilities rather than their inherited status. General Marcus Stone, now retired but serving as an advisor to the Coalition Council, observed the assembly proceedings with quiet satisfaction. When this war began, we thought we were fighting for Earth's survival. We didn't realize we were fighting for the soul of galactic civilization itself. The final act of the assembly was the formal dissolution of the Galactic Council and its replacement with the new governing structure. Unlike the Council's hierarchical system based on military power, the assembly operated on principles of consensus and mutual respect. Decisions were made through discussion and compromise rather than imperial decree. High Arbiter Colvin, one of the few original council members to survive the transition, offered his perspective on the transformation. In my centuries of existence, I have witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations, but I have never seen anything like what humanity has accomplished. They didn't just defeat an empire, they replaced it with something better. As the assembly concluded its historic session, delegates began planning for a future that seemed bright with possibility. Trade agreements were negotiated between species that had never been allowed to interact directly. Scientific collaborations were established to tackle challenges that affected all galactic civilization. Cultural exchange programs were created to share the rich diversity of traditions that made up the coalition's membership. Prime Minister Chen's closing address captured the spirit of the new age. Today marks not the end of one chapter, but the beginning of an infinite story. Together we will explore the universe not as conquerors, but as partners. We will face the challenges ahead not as subjects and rulers, but as equals working toward common goals. The galaxy belongs to all of us, and together, we will make it a place worthy of our children's dreams. The applause that filled the assembly hall was more than celebration. It was the sound of a galaxy embracing its freedom. Humanity had set out to defend their world, and found themselves liberating an entire civilization. The age of empire was over. The age of liberty had begun, and across the stars, billions of beings looked forward to a future bright with the promise of what free people could accomplish when they worked together as equals. The human motto that had emerged during the darkest days of the war now served as the coalition's guiding principle, inscribed in the great hall where the assembly met. Freedom is not given. It is taken, but once taken, it must be shared with all who desire it. The galaxy would never be the same again, and that was exactly as it should be.